Hello, welcome. My name is Garrett. I'm a historian specifically to the Longobards. This is my interest, and you are going to be following us in a journey on this documentary where we interview some Longobards and archaeologists that really are into how they lived, how they succeeded, and what their daily lives were like. So first, Longobards. Where did they originate from? Well, we think they originated from Scandinavia, and they created this small group called the Venili. And from there, there's a whole different type of origin of how they became their own group. But from Scandinavia, they moved to Pannonia. Now that today is modern-day Hungary/Slovakia. And within that own group, they created the Suebi, which was early Germanic tribes. So after they were settling in the early Germanic tribes around the 5th century, then they moved down into northern Italy. And so during that time, their king was King Audun, and King Audun was the one that got the whole group to be able to move from Pannonia to northern Italy. Now, King Audun passed away during a war with the Gepids, which was their current enemy, and so his son, King Alduin, sounds very similar, I understand, defeated the Gepids and then settled in northern Italy officially. Now, we know that when he settled in officially by a historian named of Paul the Deacon, he was a historian that wrote the history of the Longobards, excuse me, that was a football player. He allied with Eastern Rome, and at this time Eastern Rome was held in control by Constantinople, and with Eastern Rome, they fought other enemies of the Roman Empire, and with that, they were able to live in northern Italy. And this lasted from around 568 to 774 AD. Now, around 774 and later on, the Franks were able to defeat the Longobards in a series of wars, which then led to, after that invasion, small city-states, and then the Longobards people were much smaller, and it wasn't as unified as it was in its prime, which was from the dates of 568 to 774. I hope you continue on this journey and find this very interesting, and I look forward to seeing you in our next clip. Welcome back. I'm your host, Garrett Bassich, and we're going to continue on our Longobard documentary. Today we're going to have a chance to understand the Longobards and their weapons and how they had strategies with war. And luckily, we have a Longobard warrior right here.
I'm King Adelin. I'm the leader of the Longobards. So an important thing to remember when you're looking at the Longobards is that not every soldier had armor. It was only the very, very wealthy and the very select few, kind of the wealthy elites that would have chainmail and helmets. And the typical soldier might have some boiled leather to take into battle, but other than that, they were kind of completely defenseless, aside from their shield, which was their defensive weapon. And then for the basic soldier, most of them would have a spear. It was actually the wealthy that would have swords like these.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah, very cool. And another thing to remember is that they were hired as mercenaries for the Eastern Roman Empire. So a lot of their weaponry was actually based off of that. Like, for example, they had short swords similar to the gladius that were used by the Eastern Roman Empire.
So they had a lot of Roman influences, is what you're saying.
A lot of Roman influence. You know, they were hired as mercenaries. So it's a kind of a stereotype that they were unorganized or undisciplined. They were actually incredibly disciplined. They would drop formations, shield walls, similar to the Roman legions, and they were actually used as skirmishers when they were hired as mercenaries. So they were actually on the front line and sent first against the enemy to kind of soften them up for the legions that would come in later. As far as tactics go, they were a mastery of ambushing. A common strategy would be to attack and then retreat and then attack again and retreat, and this would go on, and it would kind of wear the enemy thin, especially if they were outnumbered. In the battle against the Gepids, the Longobards, a tactic they used, they actually sent a minority of their army against them to face them in the open field, and had the majority of their army waiting for them, and they led them on this retreat after it appeared that they had lost the battle, to an area where they could be ambushed and win the day. So it was a series of ambushing, feigning retreat, and then attacking again.
Wow, that's so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
You're very welcome.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Garrett Basic, and we're going to be looking into today fashion, food, and family. So starting off with our good old Longobard fashionist, or not fashionist, fashionista, or fashionista, whatever the saying is, we're going to take a look at what they wore.
All right, I'm gonna have my mannequin here take a lovely strut across our runway and appear next to me so I can point out to all the lovely people here exactly what he is wearing. So, fashion for men at the time, they typically wore white leggings. The Longobards were very notorious for these. They were detectable in battle at all times, making the enemies cower in fear. We top it off with our belt, asphyxiated on the waist as so, usually with silver or gold ornamentation to show nobility. And then we have it topped off with our gray gown. And now this gray gown usually
Are you sure about
lower classness by the people here, but this warrior actually, you can tell by his belt buckle and his leggings that he is of the warrior category. Do a little spin for the people.
Beautiful.
Absolutely. Now, women at the time, women were able to typically dress similar to this, obviously without the leggings, but they'd still have belts and other jewelry like earrings, necklaces, and bracelets and brooches. People think that we Longobards didn't have much color to us, as you see in this fellow right here, but we actually wore pretty bright colors depending on our social ranking. That'll conclude the portion on clothing. I'll no longer need my assistant. Thank you. All right, so I believe our next topic of interest is the family.
Yes.
Family and children life. Now, family was the most important part of the Longobard culture. Honor was what you wanted to bring home. Warriors sought in battle honor for their family. It was all about social ranking for the Longobards. If someone were to dishonor your family in any way, you could practically avenge them by killing them or doing some other type of unspeakable deed.
Wow.
As for women and children, women were primarily the homemakers, of course. They would prepare the food, do things of that nature. That's how the daughters were raised as well, collect clothing materials. And then as for the boys, they were taught to hunt at a very young age. And the reason being is that Longobards thought that hunting would lead to success in battle. So if they could hunt down an animal or any type of prey, they could easily defeat someone in battle. So that was most of what the leisure time was spent on for boys and men.
And so now we're talking about food.
Yes, yeah. So food here in the Longobard country, we have a wide variety of meats, veggies, and fruits. Hunters would often bring back pigs, sheep, even horse meat. Now, horse meat was only for the most royal of people. The horses were very sacred in our culture, so those are only for nobility to eat. But pigs, sheep, cow, all multifunctional in our villages, and those are the main meats that you see coming in. We also grow a bunch of chestnuts and walnuts as agriculture. We use those for trading. So there's a lot of trade going on too that stimulates our economy and brings in all that good stuff.
Very interesting. We're going to continue talking a little bit more about the Longobards and their origins. I know I briefly stated that they started in Scandinavia and moved down into what was known as Pannonia, which was modern-day Hungary/Austria. This was around 376 to 476 CE. This was also known as the Great Migration of this time. We also understand that some of the first encounters is when they crossed the Danube River in 276. This was one of their earliest migrations that occurred and was even encountered with the Goths. Continuing on, we know that the Longobards' greatest king, or most written about king, was King Alduin, which was the son of the King Alduin. So Alduin and Alduin, they sound very similar. Alduin, though, defeated the Gepids, and his father Alduin struggled in defeating the Gepids. So Alduin, Al, defeated the Gepids and beheaded the king of the Gepids in public. And then from there, he took the skull of the king and made that into a cup as a symbol of being the ultimate king over all of northern Italy. From there, he married the Gepid princess Rosamund. Now, this later leads to his death because Rosamund and another Byzantine mercenary plot against Alduin's death and therefore kill Alduin. We also know that the word Longobard translates in Latin as barba longa, long beard. And then earlier we know that while they were in Pannonia, which was modern-day Hungary and Austria, they also were mercenaries for the Romans, as was spoken earlier by our Longobard warrior. They fought in a few battles between the Ostrogoths as well as the Battle of Tagine in 552. Hello, we're going to be taking a bigger look at the Longobard society today, specifically religion and myths. This is huge in the Longobard society, and I'm so excited that we're going to get a chance to learn from a Longobard priest today. Please.
Thank you for having me. So I just want to sit here and talk about the Longobards and the religion and how it all started. So I just want to sit here by saying the Longobards originally practiced paganism in the beginning. Most people do not know that. I know if people associate the Longobards with Christianity, but most people do not know that paganism is how they started. Until around, I guess, the time, maybe most people say 642 AD, when they went and traveled to northern Italy. And there in northern Italy, the Longobards had a Roman influence of religion, in which today we know as Christianity. And I guess most people talk about just one God, but Roman Christians actually worship many different gods during that time, such as during that time Woden or Odin, most people like to say. And with the Moravian Queen Philippa being a Catholic in the Moravian, the monarchy was brought over a heavy Catholic influence during that time.
And now we get a chance to look at the Longobard society, specifically social structure, and today we have with us an Aramani, excuse me. Go ahead and take over.
All right, I'll let you know exactly what an Aramani is in a second. For our social structure, it's very atypical of the typical Germanic structure, because we largely adopted our social structure from the Celts, actually. So up at the top, we have our warrior king. Below that, we have the king's right-hand men, who are also warriors, and they're from an aristocratic military class. So his right-hand men are the dukes, and the dukes basically command other warrior aristocrats called Aramani, and they're bound to him typically through ties of kinship. Here in the kind of intermediate region of our social structure, we have the Aldi, who are free men who typically work as soldiers. They're foot soldiers, squires, and archers. And then at the bottom we have basically servants who live in conditions of slavery. They're often the indigenous peoples we conquer in the Italian peninsula, and they do a lot of our farming and other work.
And now we're going to be talking a little bit about economics.
Okay, so lately, the aristocrats such as myself are raiding peasants and stealing their land. So we have a very agricultural economy that's coming up here in Italy. Typically, we only have like a very feudal economy right now. We really only have markets in town centers, and in more rural areas we have markets around churches, where we typically trade agricultural products, livestock, and crafts. Usually the merchants of these wares are the producers themselves. We don't have really a merchant class doing it. And we do have some exposure to larger trade networks, usually free Romans who are left over from the fall of the empire know the trade routes around the Mediterranean, around the Italian peninsula, and up over the Alps, and they help get our goods around. We also impose a tertia, which is a tax of 1/3 of all harvests on the local peasantry, and they love us for it.
Now we're going to be talking a little about government and laws. Now we know that when the Longobards first started out, when they got into northern Italy under King Alduin, the laws were not as refined as they were later on in history, and we're going to be discussing what happened as their laws got more refined as they became more advanced in society.
Yeah, so Alduin has been doing a lot lately. Typically our kings used to just be these strong warriors, and they weren't really in charge of governing a whole lot. But now kings are acting as sovereigns in the case of Alduin. And so he essentially represents us and our newfound state against the Byzantine Empire, the papacy, the Franks, and he really just helps cohere our state. Below him we have the dukes, who also have a new role. Basically, actually, these are Alduin's invention and his right-hand men. So they essentially act as representatives for Alduin and the king. And they do a lot of administrative work, and they have other administrators known as Gastolds who help them out with their day-to-day tasks of running their provinces around surrounding the cities, known as duchies. And then the Arimani help the dukes administer as well. They are more responsible for the countryside of each duchy, and they often look after the economic production of the area. They look after war prospects, and they look after production using indigenous labor. So over here we have our laws as well. These are still very much under development. We still more or less follow a Germanic system of law. It's still oral. We don't really have it written down, and it's very much a work in progress.
Welcome back. We have with us a Longobard silversmith today, or blacksmith, excuse my error, and we're going to talk a little bit about burials and their traditions with burial and art.
Yep. So most of the Longobar art were things that could be held in your hand or transported with you. So the art was very practical in that sense. So the spears were decorated, you know, from the back of the spear all the way to the tip. Sometimes they would decorate their sword, you know, the hilt would be decorated. And then we had things like jewelry and things of that such. So that's necklaces, bracelets, brooches, things of that sort. You know, a lot of things that we would have today, except, you know, you didn't really get a lot of the art and paintings and sculptures and that stuff until later on in the Longobard tradition, you know, just because it wasn't useful, it wasn't something that was practical. And then for our burials, there are many different types of burials in the Longobard culture. So you had the simple burials, and that was with or without a coffin. You could have men buried, you know, and that was wood coffins, you know. Then we had our more traditional tombs. Those could have been made from anything from stone to brick, even pebbles in some senses. And then, so there were burials that sometimes, you know, when men died at war, dying away from home, right? So if you died away from home, that was signified with a pole with a dove on the top, and that was a certain memorial in a sense that would signify that, you know, you died at war, you know, because many men who died away from home, the reason would be dying at war, right? So, you know, to commemorate that in a sense, they would have the pole with the dove. And then noblemen would actually be buried with their horses and other valuables like their swords. Shields, our shields were also very decorated with, you know, everything in that sense. So noblemen were decorated with their most prized possessions as well as their horse. That's a way to tell, you know, the higher the rankings of society, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can see that.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that
Yeah,
time.
thank you.
Well, that about concludes our mini Longobard documentary. I'm your host, Garrett Bassich. Thank you so much for stopping by. We hope you really enjoyed this journey with us, and we hope you learned something special about him. Thank you, and have a great day.
Honor was, okay, now we're gonna have to stop again.
Okay, hold on.
Really? If the Barnavian queen, Zoe,
Name is John C.
Very cool. And cut.